Welcome to the Health Tech Edge. This is the podcast on how technology is reshaping healthcare operations. I'm Olivia Mehta, and I'm your host. Today, I'm joined with Tia Warrick, the founder of ASUS Consulting. Tia started out as an epidemiologist, and she's now built software that helps sponsors and providers get clinical trial coverage analysis right the first time, instead of fixing payment problems after they've already gone wrong. What we'll dig into today is the shift from downstream fixes to upstream accuracy, how payers and providers actually interact around coverage rules, and where AI fits into a space where the financial and compliance stakes are this high. Tia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you're trained as an epidemiologist. What got you into building coverage analysis software?
It's a great question. I started off as a clinical research coordinator at a hospital. And a clinical research coordinator is essentially someone who helps the medical doctor oversee everything that happens for the trial. So we collect data. We may help perform informed consent with the patients or anything else that's needed to allow that clinical trial to be successful at a hospital. And so one of the things that we have to do as coordinators is help facilitate and make sure the budget and contract with a pharmaceutical company is accurate. And that accuracy then feeds into what certain procedures or assessments that needs to be done is covered by insurance, or what can be covered by the pharmaceutical company. If it's completely something that is investigational, it's not something that's standard of care, then it shouldn't fall to the patient. And so that's usually something the pharma company covers. And a lot of bottlenecks come with that. It can be really complex. Medicare, Medicaid coverage rules is not straightforward. So even outside of a clinical research context, it's not straightforward. So it's very difficult to determine what is covered, what isn't, what would be billable, what isn't. And so creating a software that can clearly delineate from the very beginning, this is definitely covered by, insurance versus what isn't, definitely helps with some of those downstream effects and bottlenecks and reduces any kind of burden on the patient, right? We want to make sure that they don't get stuck with a bill, or the hospital don't get stuck with a bill that they can't recoup.
Of course. So walk us through kind of what ASUS does day to day for people who don't know much about clinical trial budgeting.
Yeah. So for ASUS, this software essentially helps build the budget, but also tracks the budget once it's built. So usually how it happens is that we have an individual called a coverage analyst. They usually look at a protocol. And a protocol is basically the entire instruction manual on how a study should be run for a clinical trial. So, for example, if you have a particular drug for looking at, let's say, cancer, and you want to have this drug be approved by the FDA, you have to do a clinical trial. So you have to write a protocol that has a study design, has background information that tells you why this particular treatment is important. And then it also has instructions on how this trial specifically would be handled, how many visits, how many times the patients have to come in, what certain assessments have to be collected based off of the treatment, like should certain safety labs be collected, should certain, physical exams, assessments, vitals, like what are the things that needs to be tracked to ensure that you're proving efficacy or safety of this investigational drug. And so as a coverage analyst, you would look at this protocol, you would look at pieces of the informed consent and some other documents to get a full picture of what this treatment is and what the study is. And you would have to make a determination in the very beginning. Is this something that can be covered, or is there certain parts of this that can be covered by insurance, Medicaid, Medicare? If it does qualify, then you can move on to the next stage of using the software. And once you figure out, okay, great, it qualifies, now I have to look at every single assessment. There could be up to 20, 30 visits.
Wow.
Across the lifespan of a protocol, right? And of that, there could be 15 assessment, 14 labs. It can be a lot. These budgets can become very complex and very long. And so each and every line item must be checked against Medicaid coverage rules, NCD, LCD codes, CPT codes. You have to check and make sure, okay, is this covered? And if it is covered, what is the frequency of the coverage, right? So for example, maybe Medicaid only covers vitals twice a year, but maybe the protocol requires vitals to be collected 6 times a year, right? So only 2 out of those 6 times will be covered by Medicaid or Medicare. And so then you would have to then determine which 2 visits that would be. And the remainder of those visits would then have to be covered by the sponsor. And you have a person going in one by one and looking at every single one of these and trying to determine what is covered and what isn't. And it's not always clear, right? So if you're looking at particular rulings or guidance on Medicare and Medicaid coverage, it's not always clear. So sometimes you have to look to literature, right? There's also a caveat with insurance that if you can justify the need of something, you can increase your chances of it maybe being able to be covered, right? So there is also that piece to it. So if they're able to look to literature and do a publication search and say, okay, it's not very clear how much of this would be covered, but due to what is in literature and to the investigator's opinion, we think that this amount should be covered based off of what's been published surrounding this.
Right.
So they do have to pull from multiple resources. It's very difficult. It's very time consuming, and it can take up to 8 months just to get a budget through. And this is very detrimental for research. And I know a lot of people usually say or coin, the phrase of, why don't we have a cure yet? Because of administrative bureaucracy, right?
Right. That just makes sense.
We don't have it because of the paperwork, honestly.
Yeah.
And so our software eliminates all of that. You can upload your protocol. It'll do all the searches. We use a smart software that will look up all and actually recreate that entire table and look up all the CPT codes. It will take all the information from Medicaid and Medicare coverage website, look up the LCD codes. It'll tell you exactly where it got the information, whether or not it was clear. And if it wasn't clear, it'll look up through Scopus and Web of Science, only peer-reviewed journal articles. That is through databases that is well recognized around the world, PubMed. And it'll pull those publications and information from it. And then it'll also give you the links as well. And then it'll tell you what can actually be covered and what isn't covered. And it'll fill in the table, and you can actually download it as a true budget template. So it eliminates that. And what would take usually a month, 2 months to do can be done in a span of minutes. And so that eliminates a lot of that administrative burden. And so the people who are in those roles is not to be a replacement, but it's to make their jobs more efficient. We still need somebody to review those things. Every line is editable, so it's something that just allows more efficiency in the process. And I think that's what makes the software so unique in that it's more of a supportive tool. It also then takes all of that information and it builds the budget. So we have information on all hospital data and payer data. So based off of the information that was uploaded in the beginning, it'll look up your address, your actual NPI number for your organization. And it'll pull hospital data averages of costs and actually build based off of the CPT codes, the budget for you for what needs to be charged to the pharmaceutical company. So it really helps from building the budget to determining what can be covered. And then we actually have an integration that tracks for invoices and payments afterwards. So it's truly an end-to-end integration tool to really help people, especially working in clinical research specifically,
Absolutely.
with budget management at the site level.
That's amazing. So I feel like after talking about that part, we have a lot of overlap here. So we also spend a lot of time thinking about how Medicaid and Medicare Advantage and just the commercial payer structures kind of communicate their own coverage rules. So from where you sit, reading the same rules, like kind of from the outside, where do you think that they cause the most confusion for providers and trial teams?
I think the confusion lies where there's gray area. And fortunately, gray area is about 80%. And a lot of it's up to the discretion of providers, right? And what they deem to be, acceptable or permissible for that to be covered, right? A lot of these things is dependent heavily on what the patient's health status is and why you thought this patient should need surgery over more conservative measures. And there's a lot of these stipulations that is up to the investigator's discretion. It's a great thing to be able to have that flexibility because there's so much variability when it comes to looking at a patient's health status. It's great to have that, but I think not having enough structure at the same time is the downside of that. You can go to 2 different providers, get 2 different opinions, and they're both valid. And because of that, that can create confusion as to if both of these things can be true, the insurance companies are just as justified in denying claims, right? So that's where it becomes very complicated on, between payer and providers. And so for me, I think just focusing on more evidence-based aspects that yes, two things can be true, but this is my patient. This is the patient that I'm seeing based off of the information that I have. This is my recommendation. And I think by creating that kind of justification, which is what compiles in the system software where we build our budgets, it does eliminate a lot of the stress for hospitals when they're building budgets. And it also helps with the negotiations sometimes with the sponsors as well. If the pharmaceutical companies want to ask for a lower rate or something like that, it's justified in evidence-based. It's not just, this is what we think it would be. It's like, no, this is from hospital data, actual evidence-based. This is just what it is. And I think it eliminates a lot of that back and forth.
Amazing. That totally makes sense. Thank you. So kind of the next question going off of that, payers publish LCDs, NCDs, locality codes, kind of expecting compliance. Providers, trial sponsors are stuck interpreting those. So where do you see that kind of relationship working well, and where does it break down?
Yes, absolutely. So that's another reason why the software is great, because they don't need to interpret any of it. It pulls all those LCDs, MCDs. And I think right now, when I first started learning how to build these budgets, it is so difficult to understand all the locality codes, regional codes, there's state codes, there's federal codes.
It's like another language.
Yeah. You may think, oh yeah, I got it. The regional code is great. And then there's one specific local law that completely goes against everything that you thought that you accomplished up until that point. And so that is what makes the software so smart, is that it looks it up to the local level. And that's why in the beginning, entering your NPI number as an organization, and every organization has to have an NPI number if you're in healthcare. So that is how we're able to get right down to the local codes and create those comparisons. And so it's difficult, especially when you're a person doing it on your own. So having that kind of software and tools, I think, is the future, to think about ways we can automate our jobs and not replace. I know there's a lot of stigma and fear about that, which is rightfully so for certain industries, but I can only speak for this industry. And in the healthcare industry specifically, I do not believe that this will replace their roles. It's only going to enhance it to a point where they would unfortunately have to evolve a little bit in their roles to learn how to use more smart tools. But other than that, there's always going to be a need for somebody to review these things, right? There's always going to be a need for somebody to coordinate, to have the expertise to even know how to use the tool, to know what to ask, to know what to look for. And so I do think that this will only enhance people who has to deal with those things and take the burden off of understanding all the minutia. It'll do all the work. As long as you understand the foundational functions, which most people do in healthcare, it'll do the rest.
It's always so refreshing when we hear someone, kind of speak similarly in language that we do, where it's like, it's not a taking away of jobs or anything like that. It's a real serious integration with what we're doing. We always need somebody, a real human being to actually look at these things and figure these things out. But it's really just a good tool to kind of eliminate a lot of that stress and discrepancies and everything like that. So I love hearing that. Is there a version of this where payers benefit directly from tools like ASUS and not just providers?
That's a really good question. And that's something that I was thinking about how they could. And I think in a way, it's not direct. It's beneficially indirect for them. Because, for example, let's say we create a budget in a clinical trial and we said that this could be covered, but it actually couldn't be covered, right?
Sure.
There's a lot of times in the informed consent, depending on who the pharma company is and how the informed consent was written, we would either say under the insurance clause of that informed consent to a patient, you will be liable for anything that isn't covered, or you will not be liable for anything that isn't covered, right? It'll say either or. Either or is acceptable depending on, like I said, the situation and the client and where the hospital is located. All that comes into play, but it's either or. So if, let's say, for example, we said this could be covered, we submit this to the insurance company with the knowledge or assumption that it was going to be covered, but the insurance company then denies this claim and it cannot be basically reimbursed. That then falls onto the payer, right?
Right.
The next logical step is to state, well, you signed this informed consent, which said that if this cannot be reimbursed, you will be liable for this.
Right.
And you signed that with the understanding of this. So now you're on on the hook for that. So this particular aspect happens a little bit more times often than not. And it does create a burden on patients. And so I think that having the software also really does pull from thousands and thousands of data points. It's a little bit more accurate in all the information that you can pull. We're human at the end of the day, we can miss things, but if we use automation tools that can pull way more data than we could pull in a faster amount of time, it can increase its accuracy in it being, accepted when you go to submit that claim for reimbursement. So I do think that indirectly it helps providers in the long run, but it more so immediately helps providers.
Yeah. But I think that, kind of symbiotic relationship with us is so important, So you're licensed with AMA and SkyCloud and you're running proprietary trained AI with some LLM integration, if I'm correct.
Yes.
So given the financial and compliance stakes, how do you kind of think about accuracy and guardrails? That's something we've been talking a lot about as a company, but also just, in the general AI, specifically healthcare AI space right now.
That's a really great question. Yes, especially with all that's going on with AIs and
Yes.
how do we make sure that it's not having a mind of its own or hallucinating, which I think was the biggest issue with AI when it first came out. And I think to think about it, you can put a lot of restrictions onto an AI. You can put as much as you want, or you can put not as much, right? So some other AI models, I won't specifically name them, but some more popular, more better known AI models out there, they do not have a lot of restrictions on their AI. They have the cybersecurity restrictions, all the things that make it safe to use.
Right.
But what I mean is there's no restrictions in telling it when not to or to say something in the sense of information, right? Any kind of violations and all those things, of course, they're putting restrictions on that. But a good example to state is if you're going to go into an AI and ask it a question about geography, right? It's going to ask you what geography are you looking for? It can tell you about every single geography. And the reason why it's so open to provide all that information is to create a broader audience, right? The more restrictions you put on your AI, the more narrow your audience is, right? Everybody can basically use most of these very popular AI models out there right now, and you can literally ask it anything. So that means that this is the audience that they're appealing to is the entire world, which is great. And it's useful for what it is intended to be used for. For my particular AI, I have particular guardrails that is very specific to the function that I need it to do. So you can't ask it about the geography, right? But you can definitely ask it anything budget and payer related. And there's particular guardrails where on the back end, we tell it, if you are not 100% sure about this information, do not provide a response. Now, if the AIs that are popular did that, they would really, really limit their pool of people who could be able to use that. And so you can definitely mitigate hallucinations and you can mitigate how the AI behaves based off of the restrictions you give it. So thankfully, because I'm trying to solve one simple problem that will make a huge administrative difference in my industry, I do have that ability to create those restrictions needed to provide that high level of accuracy in my AI, because we're only focusing on one thing and that just makes it work even better. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. It's very hard to kind of narrow in exactly certain things. So totally makes sense. So 2 years in, 7 programmers now still, and that's huge development so fast. So what changed kind of operationally as you scaled past it, just you being the person who were building it?
Yeah, I think what scaled for me is just the time to focus more so on the outwardly on the business side of making people know about the software. Clinical research industry specifically, it is a networking game. We're not really big on marketing. You'll see the most marketing you'll see is the commercials when the treatment is approved, right? We're pretty much a closed door industry and we have to be. A lot of these things we can't discuss. These things we're in CDAs, NDAs, MSAs, any agreement you can think of, we're signed to it. And so it is pretty secretive in that sense until, it comes to market because of the competition, because of the pipelines, because of the race to, find a treatment or a cure. It can be very competitive in that sense. So you won't see a lot of this information be available to the public. Right. And so for me, I wanted to focus more on the visibility of, okay, here we have this now. I've been focusing so much internally on making sure it's a quality product that I would feel comfortable using. If I don't feel comfortable using something, then I can't genuinely and authentically convince other people to use it. So I wanted to make sure it was at a level in which I, as a professional working in the industry, can say, oh yeah, I can use this and I feel confident in it.
Right.
So once I felt like we had a good basis and it just needed to be refined and grow, and I had the team that I needed, I then started to focus my sights on more of the networking aspect, more of the telling people about it, right? And so I'm very well connected in the industry. I have great connections. So it's not like something I had to, do a whole ad campaign about. And so I reached out to my contacts and did a couple of demos, was able to get some live testing, some UAT testing, and they were able to give feedback and give their own perspective on certain tweaks here and there. And overall, we've gotten phenomenal feedback. And, it's definitely a need because I am getting reached out to by a lot of people now asking for demos, asking about, okay, this is amazing. Can we get, free access? Can we try out the system? And so it really is growing a lot more faster than I thought.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing, but also it shows me the need that this is something that, no one really would think about. And it's one of those administrative things that you think, okay, we just have to get it done. But that is the whole reason why we should be using the technology we have now to fix the things that people don't even think about. That makes the biggest administrative bottlenecks.
Right.
This is what we should be focusing on as a way to keep pushing our industry forward. And so I'm just seeing how well it's being received and how important that it actually will be in somebody's everyday workflow only enables me to continue on to bring the awareness there. So that's where the next steps are for me, is to now start deploying the software with different companies and hospitals and organizations, and just continue to grow there. Think about other ways or other things we can automate, other bottlenecks that we can find, and continue to build the software.
Amazing. So kind of rolling right into the last question here. What is one thing for our payer heavy audience? If there's an exec out there listening to this episode, what is something that you would like them to walk away thinking differently about?
It's a silo, right? Payer, providers. We are more connected and more overlapping than we think. And something that can make a provider's life easy can just as easily make a payer's life easy. And it's not something that's segmented. Everything has these downstream effects. Everything has, a give and a take. And so for payers out there, if there are ways that you can support in working with providers and ensuring that they have the automations that they need, it can ultimately make your life indirectly more easier. It can also help with administrative bottlenecks. It can provide improvement in, closing out your claims. There's a lot of pressure to make sure claims are closed out in a timely manner, that reimbursements are created, because that's the only way you can see, okay, how much utilization of, financing is actually going through. And so by creating more automation, I think regardless of whether it's on the payer or provider side, ultimately it will benefit both parties. It's a symbiotic relationship, and one cannot be successful without the other. And so I think that if you are a payer out there and you think, how can this relate to me? I think definitely be involved. Speak to your providers, ask them about what resources do they have, or if you know of resources that are useful. I think those type of communication and collaboration is needed on both sides to be able to push it forward, because we need each other to be successful. So I think that that's the message that I would share.
Thank you so much. This has been so great. Thank you for your time in this conversation. And thank you to everyone for listening. If you're working on a clinical trial budgeting or thinking about how coverage decisions get made before they even reach a payer, Tia's approach is so worth paying attention to. Getting it right upstream saves everybody time down the line, sponsors, providers, payers, everybody. So we will link ASUS below in the show notes. And until next time, this has been the Health Tech Edge.
Thank you so much for having me.
So much.